Now I'm going to go over the final assembly of the child stool. I have all of my finished parts. They've all dried for the length of time specified in the lab manual. And again, you want to use the video as a secondary resource. Read and understand all of the steps in the lab manual. Read through them all before you go through the assemblies. You don't want to get halfway through and realize you've made a mistake. First, you want to make sure you dry fit everything. As mentioned on the leg assembly, these are actually mated to each side. So this one fits on this side, and then this other leg assembly fits on the opposite side. They aren't reversible because this piece happened to have been tapered. So I've checked that out. I've inspected the length of my parts, so my brace is good, my top is good, my legs are all good. I've stepped through the instructions and completed any steps that need to be done prior to this. Now I'm ready for the final assembly. What we're going to do with the final assembly, I'm going to rotate this so the camera can see it better. When you're working, you want this to be rotated to where that you can see it best. So you would drop these two pieces in, and then I'm going to use the brace as a gauge, a setup gauge, to set the distance between these two parts. So the brace is acting as a gauge. It's going to set the distance here, and then I know that it's going to be about 1/8 of an inch from either one of these miter joints. But you also can measure this. So I can take a ruler, I can measure on the insides of both corners to make sure that my part isn't out of square, and then I can measure across both sides and make sure that it's uniform. So it's off a little bit, but the miters are cut slightly incorrect. So this miter comes up a little higher than this miter. So you have to make sure everything is cut properly. Part of what you're going to be doing is making the judgment call. If something is incorrect, what do you feel is the best compromise? Making this whole assembly closer to this edge, or to where this can be noticed from the side view. So each person's is slightly different, and there's not one good answer, but there can be done incorrectly. It can look worse done one way than the other. So it's a judgment call each time. If there's mistakes that are made, points can be lost. Just make sure you do it the best way possible. There are some ways that will lose a few points and other ways that would use a lot of points. So I'm going to make the decision to slightly make this side a little larger than this side and line this up. And it's barely different. So if I measure it, there's barely any difference between this side and this side. It's a little over an inch, a little under an inch. That's okay. I think it looks reasonable. Now that you've got it all set up, if you were working at your station, you would then turn your stool facing away from you. Again, you don't want to slide this on the table, so I'm picking it up as I move it, moving it towards the end of the table. I'm going to take a small scrap of wood, butt it up on the back side, and then you can take any style clamp that you wish. I'm going to clamp this block down to the table. Again, careful not to shift it as you tighten your clamps. So now this block is set in place. Now I can remove these components, and then I can pull this out. I can apply glue, and then when I drop it back in place, it'll be in the same location. That will allow this to be centered when it comes back on later on. So everything will go back in how you set it up. You can double check it real fast, do a dry run. Understand what you're going to do before you start applying glue. So now I'm going to take this part. I want to keep this edge will be out towards the outside of the product. So I'm going to put the glue biased towards the back. I'm going to put the glue all along this face and then just drop it in. Clean off the top of my glue bottle. Open it up. And then this is a much wider surface than we've been working with, and we're gluing end grain. The end grain has a tendency to soak up a lot more glue than the face grain or the edge grain. So as I spread the glue out, you may notice that you need to use a little extra than what you've been used to. Still, you want to make sure you stay a little bit off of the edges, and you want to keep it biased towards the side that won't be seen as much. So I'm spreading out my glue kind of everywhere, kind of getting it worked up a little closer to the end here. And it is a little heavy, so I can clean some of this off by just letting it stay on my finger, and then I'll clean my finger off. Again, I'm only going to apply glue to one item I'm working on at a time. Never apply glue in advance on other items. So now I've got glue on here, it's spread out nice and thin. I've got my set block in place. I'm just going to drop it, stand it up vertical, and then push it straight down. Now there's no shifting or sliding or smearing of the glue. So this piece is on there pretty good. Again, we have countersinks, so I'm going to use the conical style screw, and then it's much easier to use this extended driver and this other style screwdriver here, so I can reach over top of the handle of the leg. If you try to use the hand drill, you're going to end up bumping into the side of your part. Most people end up doing that, so I really advise for this step, you should definitely use this combination. The screwdriver is not long enough and the drill is not long enough. So as you're pushing, push down with your palm, using your body weight and twisting it in slowly. Once it gets near the bottom and it starts to snug up, don't over tighten it. Drop my second screw in. And again, the hand, using it by hand is pretty quick. The drill might be faster, but you have a lot more control this way and it's still pretty fast. So I've got my next leg. Again, apply the glue. Half or so inch away from the edge, bias towards the sides that aren't going to be seen. Close it when you're finished, and then spread the glue out. So the end grain again doesn't glue as well. The edge grain will glue much better. So you want to make sure this has got a decent bit of glue on it. It's going to do most of the holding. The end grain of the leg won't glue as well. So there's a lot of glue, plenty of it spread out on the glue block, and that's what its name is for. Clean off my finger on my decently clean cloth over here. So now I'm going to use my brace as a gauge. Just line it up. When you get close, make sure you're not going to smear glue on one of your aprons. And just drop it straight down in place. Make sure it's square, that it's not teetering left or right at all. It looks pretty well lined up. There's no gap between my brace. A little bit. Go. Now the brace is no longer really needed. You could leave it in if it's not in your way. You could unclamp this at this time and rotate it 90 degrees if you're not comfortable reaching over your workpiece. I'll actually do one with the drill. So again, when you're doing this, you want to make sure that you're not hitting the drill against the part, and it really makes it come in at an angle, and it's not always ideal. See, it kind of pushed my part out because the screw came in sideways and it scooted my part over. So this way I can hold the screwdriver almost 90 degrees the entire time. Push as you twist it. I no longer need my little block. Again, don't slide your part. Now you're going to need these other setup gauges. So they've got arrows that indicate the way you want to use it. So it's not a perfect square. So don't use it standing upright. You're going to use it with this orientation. Pick my brace up. Take the block with the arrow facing up and down. Set it on top of a glue block. And again, this is the setup gauge to set the distance of the brace from the top assembly. Pop it on there. You want to be standing in this direction so that you can see it's lined up. Don't try to do it this way. It's very difficult to see if this is centered. So from the camera's point of view, you can easily tell if this is shifted left or right. Once you rotate it, it's very difficult to tell if it's rotated from the camera's point of view, if it's shifted left or right. So make sure you are standing in line with the part. Line it up, center it best you can. You can look along the bottom edge and see the space that's right here. And now we're going to use the flat bottom Craig screws. Now that I've lined it up, I can move it to a more ergonomic angle. Push on the back of it as you drive the screw in. Even though the part's moving around, the screw head hasn't moved. So before I tighten that all the way, I'm going to go ahead and start on the other one. This one seems to be sticking a little bit. I'll try another one. So the reason we use the flat bottom screw is if you look carefully at your part, there's actually a flat bottom on this pocket hole that we made. If you put a conical screw in here, it's actually going to split the wood right at the very top. It'll pop this piece of wood off. So we have to use a flat bottom screw in the flat bottom hole. Again, I want to make sure it's all lined up. You got to put support on the back side or you'll bend the leg over. And then before I close it all the way up, I'll put the second screw in. And it's just good practice not to tighten one before starting the other. And again, you could use the hand drill here. That would be fine for this. Just make sure you don't drive it all the way to the bottom. Snug that up. So no longer need any of these tools. I can take the little blocks out. And then I finish the assembly.